Tell me when, Dan.
It should be coming up in just a second. Let me just double check. Come on. All right, it looks like we're good to go.
All right, I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Board of Finance, Wednesday, April 15th. I'd like to start by Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. All right. Is there any public comment? Rich Saluga raised his hand. All right, Dan, bring in Rich.
All right, go ahead.
Rich Saluga, 32 Great Heron Lane. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to congratulate the BOE. I attended their subcommittee finance meeting today, and they identified over $600,000 in potential savings. What was interesting is I had identified for you last week almost $700,000 in savings from what I could see, and I hadn't even looked at half of the things they looked at. So they only used about 50% of what I had identified. So I think there's a whole lot more there. I think they also agreed in their meeting with each other that there's more there. Just to give you an example, the electric item has about $250,000 for the last 4 or 5 months, and they only put in about $15,000 in savings. And they acknowledge that there's probably going to be a lot more there. So again, I think that's a good start. I also indicated to you last week that I think their savings could offset any additional appropriations that you folks were asked to make, because these were savings on top of the freeze savings that they already identified. So when you add those two things together, you're talking about $900,000. You add another $300,000 that I had put in, you're talking well over $1 million in savings. So I think that's going to go a long way to help us, and certainly cover any overages that they might have and still have more left over. So I was pleased to see that. And I see Rose is on in the meeting, so I just wanted to say, nice going to the BOE, and look to see more. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Any other public comment? None? All right, here we go. All right. So what I think I'd like.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Yep, Laura, let me see. All right, Laura.
Yeah. Hi, sorry. Can you hear me? I didn't know how to raise my hand.
It's all good.
Okay. So Laura Orban, 95 Stony Hill Road. So I also appreciate everybody's hard work and appreciate the 30-day extension. And I just wanted to encourage everyone, as you're looking at the additional information that you have, to consider. I certainly realize what a challenging time this is for everybody. I know that a lot of work went into the original budget, and I would hope that you would, as much as you're considering the challenges that people are having on the tax side, also consider the fact that we need to keep people in their jobs. We need to keep the town services going. And I would hope that you would consider keeping the budget that you had intact as much as possible. I think it was a good budget, and the fact that everyone voted in favor of it prior to this all happening says a lot. So thank you for giving me a couple minutes.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, anybody else? All right, that being said, let's move on to the agenda item, which is basically discussing the budget, the process, where we stand, what our thoughts are. So I've given a lot of thought to this whole process, and both the speakers that just spoke publicly, I agree with both of them in some extent. They both bring valid points to what we need to talk about. What I'd like to accomplish tonight is we set a budget with dates, town hearing, dates of what, we're going to do, when we're going to set the budget. I think Marcia has a calendar that we can talk to and around. I think the other points are, and Rosa can maybe share or allow us to share the document on the savings of the Board of Ed that they had. I don't know if it's public to share, and Rosa can come on after I finish and say that, but they did have, as Rich stated, a meeting today. And I think my take on this is, and what we have to be careful of, is during this whole process, we can't generate savings. We got to be careful on what we generate as savings, but realize actual savings. And in explaining that in more detail, not using fuel is an actual savings. That is a realized savings. We didn't use it, we're not going to have it. But I think we got to work together as a team of supplies, textbooks. I mean, these are things that the Board of Ed was looking to generate savings, and rightfully so. This isn't a pick on, but is it a time to generate savings in those areas? Or let's talk together and spend wisely to buy the textbooks, to buy paper, to buy supplies, things that we've cut in prior years. And what we also need to keep in mind is how to cushion ourselves if we use money from the savings and dilute the mill rate. What's going to happen year 2? I mean, the expenditures are still there, and we've diluted the mill rate, reduced the mill rate, but next year the increase is going to be 7% out the gate. If we use it so we got to look at expenditures, we got to look at 2-year plans instead of a 1-year plan, I think, and encapsulate all of that. I think we need to ask both sides to do our due diligence, the town side and the Board of Ed side, of can they make any more reductions that will not be catastrophic, that will help us get the expenditures down. Not the fact that it's not a good budget, not the fact that it's not a budget that is sufficient, but the fact is it in the current pandemic a reasonable, but not reasonable, but a budget that we can't reduce to offset some of the hardships our neighbors are going to. I don't want to, like I say, reduce anything. I'd like to talk about it, maybe have targets of what we'd like to see them present to us in the following weeks of what we can do. Again, not demanding, not just asking, hey, we have taxpayers in bad positions and hardships. Is there something that they can provide to us and say, hey, town might be able to say, hey, we can look at these 3 items and maybe give, $100,000. The Board of Ed can say, hey, we'd really like to have this, but we understand the situation. Maybe we can help out. And again, not a demand. So I think we got to frame all of that for our next meeting. And how do we want to approach what information we want from people, how we want it provided. I think Rosa, like the presentation today, Rosa even said we need a little bit more detail even from her side. She asked about, can we add a column? Can we do this? Because I think when we first set out the budget and we approved this budget, we approved it for 6,000 people to decide on the budget, or 5,000 people to decide on the budget, not the 6 of us. Now it's flopped to the 6 of us, where I think we need to get information and help from everybody and listen to the Board of Ed, listen to the Board of Selectmen, and try to move it forward. So I will leave it at that for roundtable discussion on what each member would like to see and for next week's meeting. And so that we can have next week, we can set a meeting and we can set the different milestones we want. But that's what I'd like to see, is to ask each board to see where they can maybe make cuts. And I'm not saying cuts because of nastiness or vengeance or anything. Like, how can we help the people out if we can at all? And the same thing with Steve's side is, how do we take these extra revenues or savings and how do we flatten out 2 years worth so we don't come out next year and be so far in the hole? So at that, I'll pass the baton to Dan and let you start around the horn. How's that?
All righty. I agree. I think that we're on the right path. My questions have to do with, I wasn't, and I think you have a good point about creating kind of a 2-year time horizon to think about this. I hadn't thought about how keeping expenses at a certain level and adding savings creates a double whammy the following year. So that's something that I hadn't thought about and do need to consider, impacts of that and how we go about doing that. If there is, material identified savings on both the town budget and the school budget for this temporary shutdown, how do we mechanically apply those savings to different fiscal years? I don't know the answer to that. So maybe Marcia can educate us on that today. I'd like to hear, I didn't get a chance. I was busy with my paying job and was not able to listen to the Board of Ed Finance Committee meeting this afternoon, but I would like, if possible, to get a summary of what was discussed this evening as well. I watched our meeting, which I wasn't at because of Passover last week. I watched Marcia go through in some good detail some of where we are in the town. If there's any updates on that, and then I think we're on the right path, and we just need to keep going.
So this is Steve. I wonder, why don't we have Marcia? We put together an overview of what the savings from this year would look like over the next 2 or 3 years, and how it would affect the mill rate, all of those sorts of things. I think if we let her put that up, that's probably a good starting point, so you understand what's going on with at least the town side. I don't think we've gotten anything yet from the Board of Ed, but I think a discussion of how we would possibly achieve savings this year and roll them into next year to lower the mill rate and the increase in taxes is probably a good place to start. What do you guys think? Glenn?
No, I agree, Steve. I just wanted to get a few opinions out there
Okay.
first before we rolled
Sure.
into that.
Okay,
Because you didn't
Go
come
ahead.
on at first, and I appreciate you got so much on your plate. So that's not like anything bad. I think we got to ask the town and ask the Board of Ed, even reducing on expenditures, not saying we're going to, but let's look at it one last time. And I know, Steve, you got a handle, and I think Rosa now has a handle on her aspect of things.
okay.
And I
Okay.
think we owe it to the taxpayers to look at it, not act on it. How's that? Not act on a cut just to make a cut, but if you can find some savings somehow, and I don't know where, and that's what we talked about. So I just wanted to get people's feel, and then we're
Okay.
going to turn the meeting over to you and Marcia and
Okay.
to walk through what you've done. And then we'll probably turn the meeting over to Rosa, Steve, I think, and let her talk to her savings. I
Okay.
think she had a good meeting today as well. And I think she brought up some really good points. How's
Okay,
that in
good.
her meeting?
I'm fine with that.
So I think we're going to take your detail and Marcia's detail to heart. I just wanted you to hear some of what we're thinking. And then as we're doing the presentation, you could probably roll right into it. How's that? All right. Mark, you want to go up next?
Sure. So I agree we have to look at things, but I think it's more than, to me, it's more than before it was going to be the town voting on it. Now it's the 6 of us deciding it. To me, it's more than that. If we knew when we were setting this budget how bad things were going to be for people, I know I wouldn't have voted the way I voted on a lot of the items. So it has nothing to do with the fact that just we're the 6 making the decision. In my mind, it's times have changed. So that's my first thought on that. And the Board of Ed, I'm eager to hear Rosa's proposal or documents or whatever we have from that. And I just wanted to say that, Rosa, I really do appreciate the work the Board of Ed, the administration, you guys are doing on that. And to me, it is not a reflection of the hard work you guys put into making your budget, because I think you did a good budget. I appreciate anything you do as an extra step that we're going to be dealing with in this time of crisis. So I just wanted to make that clear. No way am I trying to punish you or anything like that. I appreciate what you're doing for us. That's it.
All right. Ricky, Ricky? Eileen? Oh,
Hey,
there's
can you
Ricky.
guys hear
Go
me
ahead.
okay?
Your turn, Ricky.
All right, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm with you on the expense side. I mean, anywhere that can be cut, it would be nice to see if we could reduce expenses. But again, to Glenn's point from earlier, I don't want them to just be things that we're going to need to tack on at a later date, or something that's kind of just a superficial cut that, you know, to the textbooks, or, you know, something that's not going to be a real savings, something that we're going to just need further down the road. So that's my big concern. On the, you know, on the revenue side, I mean, I think we're on a good path. I listened into the meeting earlier, and I think we're on a great path, and I'm looking forward to seeing what updates, you know, what updated numbers we can get. The 600,000 savings that they came up with looks great. I think it's a little deceiving though, because I don't think it totally takes into account the whole picture. So we can't just, you know, I think we need to be realistic and not just say, great, we have 600,000 there. So I think that's a discussion point I definitely want to dive deeper into.
Okay, Eileen?
I think, you know, knowing the amount of review that went into the budgets going into the whole process, and, you know, that we did all agree that this was, you know, there were some significant cuts to what the Board of Education asked for through the Board of Selectmen and then verified by us. You know, I think that, you know, we have to look that the school year is, you know, hopefully going to start on a normal note. And so, you know, we might have savings this year from the closures, and hopefully that can help offset some stuff if there's the expenses, if there's a chance to have that spread out over 2 years to lessen the blow, you know, coming the next year, since it would be a one-time savings. I think that would be great if we can explore that as an option. I mean, if there are efficiencies that can be found or anything, but I don't want to start off, you know, the next fiscal year with putting things, you know, having a freeze in the budget because we, you know, didn't provide, you know, we didn't fund services that are essential. I mean, we look at how much the town is offering and the schools are offering to, you know, people between the lunches and the food pantry and the services that are being offered. And I don't want to shortchange any of that. Well, so I think we need to keep that in mind along. I mean, we need to be sensitive to, you know, the tax increases and that kind of stuff for sure. But we also have to realize the services that these funds provide for the town.
Okay. Perfect. Brianna?
Yeah, I agree with, you know, what everybody was saying. Last week when we were all together, the schools were closed until April 20th, and the very next day they were closed until May 20th. And then this week, all the governors from the tri-state area are meeting, trying to figure out how to get the economy back. So I think this is just such an uncharted path that everybody's on, trying to figure out ways to, if there are savings that we can apply to help the taxpayers real time, keeping in mind that we don't want to have to add it and tack it on at another date, but also don't want to be halfway through the budget year needing what we cut. So I just think what we're doing here over the next meetings will be helpful. And, you know, I think we just have to dissect it and figure out and make the best go of it as a team.
Okay, perfect. All right, Mr. Steve, let's get your overall opinion and we'll roll it right to Marcia. How's that?
Yeah, that's fine. One of the things I think we have to take into consideration here is that we've already spent about $130,000 this year on this COVID-19, deep cleaning our offices, putting on an extra ambulance crew, which we absolutely needed, adding an EMT on call overnight. And I think we should realize if this doesn't abate quickly, and by quickly, I mean in the next 2 or 3 months, I've heard medical opinions that said, you know, there are going to be resurgences of this virus over the next year, year and a half until we get a vaccine. We might be coming to the boards asking for more money. that we need cleaning supplies. I think we were woefully, and I think every town is in this position, woefully unprepared to be able to protect our first responders, our EMS, our police, our fire departments. Are scrambling for masks, scrambling for gowns. We're scrambling for materials to clean our ambulances and police. We need to stock up on those and have some of those. And I've got our Jason D'Souza, who's our emergency management incident manager for this, is now going around and saying, okay, what do we need to prepare? What do we need to stock for the future? So I may be coming to you and asking you for more money. So this is a very fluid situation. And I'm not at this point in time, I mean, we can achieve some savings today. And Marcia will go through them and explain how they would look over the next couple of years. But you guys are doing the right thing. You got to look at everything, but realize even the schools might have more costs. They might. We just have to wait and see and try to get the best number we can. Marcia, you got to.
Hold on, before you go, before Marcia, I'll talk to Steve's point here. Steve, I think we all agree with that, right? But what we're also seeing in the newspapers is towns going to 0% increases. So we're getting calls, or I'm getting calls from people saying other towns are doing 0% increases. Now, I'm not a proponent of that. Well, I'm not, let me be clear. 0% I think is not an answer, but I don't think if we don't look at some scenarios, we're not doing our due diligence at this point. That's all I'm trying to get to. This isn't a push on you. This isn't a demand on you, and neither on Rosa. I want to be clear on that. This is if you could take one last look at your budgets and understand the situation that we're in and give instead of us take. You know what I'm saying? It's not it's not a process of taking.
I agree with you 100%, Glenn. We should continue to look at this right up until you guys have to make a decision so we get the right decision. I've not heard of any town going to, I've heard of a lot of people across the state saying, oh, let's cut budgets, let's go down 5%. Let's, you know, when this happened in 1929 and the stock market crashed, every single business fired every single one of their employees. And it took 10 years to get out from underneath. So we have to be very careful. We don't make it worse.
Oh, I agree. Oh, wait, we're on the same page, Steve. Let's be clear.
Okay.
I'm saying like Vernon went to 0, Lyme went to 0, another town I read went to 0, all during COVID. And this is what I'm getting articles sent to me on. And again, I'm with you. We can't make the situation worse.
No, I agree. Okay.
All right, now we're going to Marcia now. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Okay, so Steve and I have been talking and going through some of this, and the way that we see it, the first thing that we had to do was analyze how it affected our operating budget. And that's what we went through last week, that where could we find savings? Where do we have costs? The next thing was capital projects, that where are we on capital projects? Do we have any savings there? And then the third component, which I don't have ready yet, is revenue. Where do we stand on revenue? What are we thinking about revenue for next year? So we went through last time, we went through the operating on the town side. And so if we go through some of these other things, I'll share my screen. That share. And then I will, I just want to go through, this is the bonded capital, and we can find some savings here. And what we did, we met with every department. Where do they stand? Where do they think is going to happen? And let's start with education. If we look at what the schedule is showing, we've put it in the financial statements, and this is just pulling it forward to March 31st, that this is the beginning fund balance, where we stood. It's not a budget to actual, that if there's something that's negative, it could be that way, and we can talk about it. It could be that way because it's a receivable. We have bond and lease proceeds. We have other revenues that come in. Expenditures, encumbrances, transfers and closeouts, and then where do we end up? And so what we want to do is just talk about, if we talk about, for example, high school, that the high school projects, that we have achieved some savings, that there are 6 projects that are all in the same category. That, these were things that were on the books and approved in prior years that are now not going to be done in the same order. That they hired Tecton to come in, and Tecton looked at these things and said, okay, well, we'll give you the 10-year plan, and these are no longer on that 10-year plan right now. So they're going to come back to us later, but for now, that they're going to release $138,000 of projects. This is the second installment. That last year at June 30th of 19, we did the same process. They released about $200,000 of reshuffled projects. And this year it's 138,000 that these are going to be reshuffled for the benefit of putting them into other projects. We've got a new generator, and the switch is involved with the generator. I don't know much about switches and generators, but apparently switches are very important, very expensive. But there's a savings there of $58,000. That project is done. So that again can go into the general coffers. This project is another generator, and the fire pump generator, that when we originally had it out there, they were thinking that we would have switches again that would need to be replaced. And the switches didn't need to be replaced. So that's a savings of $90,000. So all in all, there's $287,000 at the Board of Ed that can go into the general coffers that they're not going to use. Do I have any questions on that part?
Yeah, I do.
Me too.
Okay.
So who was me too?
Mark,
All right.
you first.
This has got to get to be a better communication process. We should have this information before talking about the bonding and what we're doing and projects. And this would have been a helpful information on the boys' locker room side discussion and going through things. I mean, the fact that we're sitting here April 15th and going through this process, this would have been nice to know front end before we decided capital projects. And I don't know what the process is, and maybe we followed process, but it seems to me that this information would have been so much better to have February, early March. So when we're doing it, we know we had this 287 and we could have reduced that or added. I mean, even forget the word reduced. We could have maybe put in 600,000 for the boys' locker room. I'm at a loss for this, I guess. So I'll let Mark go and then see what answer we get. How's that? Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some of these 14 and 15, replace AC and auditorium. That was a project that they had to have done. They never did it. It was one of those things that had to get done. That was before Tecton. I'm just finding it hard to believe that all of this is by Tecton. And would we have found any of this if we weren't in the coronavirus situation? I'm very confused by this. And I see there's more to go on the public works, but we're not getting down there yet.
And that's not a lot. That's, I think the 180 is everything there. Correct. And so there has been poor communication between the Board of Ed and the town side on this. We have worked with the Board of Ed to say your person that's in charge of these is Dan Caldwell. He needs access to Munis, and we've been asking that for about a year. He now has got access to Munis, so he can see his projects and the status, the financial status of them. but he hasn't been trained in Munis yet. So we're working with that. We also talked about setting up a process. You actually asked us 2 meetings ago to set up a process for transfers and closeouts. And if we could have them flag those when they come up to say, hey, we're not going to do this one anymore. That would be very helpful. And we could put that right into that, that policy.
Rosa, do you have anything to add since we're talking about education on this?
Yeah, I mean, what I can add is that not only do we share our updated 10-year capital plan with you all every year, these conversations were had with Dan Caldwell and Marcia and Ken and Dr. Brill prior to the holidays, probably when our budget was being constructed. So, you know, this is not our sheet and this is not, you know, accounts that we manage directly. So, you know, I'm not sure if you need more information from us, you know, that's certainly something that we can provide you, but I feel like we communicate our updates every year.
So we did communicate them at June 30th. I go over to your side to say, hey, because we did the same schedule at June 30th, where do we stand? What do we think we're going to do? And that's where we came up with 200,000 from last year of projects that had been approved that you had decided not to do. And so this is just this year's contribution to either decide not to do 130,000. So it's about half and half. Decided not to do, or that are under budget.
So are you saying that you didn't see the 10-year capital plan until most recently?
So the 10-year capital plan goes prospectively, so it goes into the future. These are things that have already been approved.
So you were not aware if these projects were done or not?
So these projects were not done. I was not aware that you weren't going to do them.
Okay.
But it's so some of them you were going to do, but you were going to roll it in. And we asked this week, could you give that money back and ask for it later?
Yeah, so can I jump in here? With Tecton coming on board and after doing all of the design work and everything, they came up with a different 10-year capital plan for the schools. And I agree with Rosa, we need much better coordination between the town and the schools on the capital projects. So I think this is more an effort of transition from what the schools originally planned for the last 3 years there. You know, they've been giving us a 10-year capital plan and what Tecton has done. So I don't think there's anyone to blame here. I think what needs to be done is updating like we're doing right now.
Agreed.
I won't disagree, but I think it would have been nicer to have in March, though. No, I mean, that's my point. It's not a matter of the numbers changing or the numbers go in different directions. It's a matter of that's $287,000. And we cut some capital because we were afraid to spend too much money, increase our mill rate, cash capital we cut. And here we are, we got this 287 sitting here that really wasn't brought up in any of our conversations during the budget. And if it was, I missed it. I mean, any other board members want to speak to it?
I mean, if it wasn't part of the process, you know, maybe we need to have a schedule that has, you know, in the calendar that we discuss this at multiple time points during the year. I mean, our Board of Finance bylaws have us look at capital projects every 2 months, I believe, as part of our agenda. And maybe we just need to establish that with the Board of Ed so that, you know, we have a scheduled time to look at this stuff and prior to budget season or prior to the presentation to the board. But you know,
yeah, I mean, there's a time to talk about process, and this probably isn't it, but it is frustrating that it seems like every other meeting when we're talking about expenses or budgets or accounts that we're relying on, that there's material information that just was either not shared or not known or not processed that impacts major decisions. I mean, there's the accreditation from last week, there's the insurance from a couple of weeks ago or months ago, and each step along the way it just creates poor decisions and poor outcomes. So it's frustrating. So we have to get the process better, but this isn't the time, but it's critical. I guess my question is, what we are where we are, this money that you're talking about, first of all, is it bonded and it can't, or was it operating capital? If it was bonded and it wasn't used, is that a problem?
It's bonded and we can transfer it to another bonded project.
Okay. So it's not just, it can't just be put back to the town and used as operating capital or general fund money. It's got to go from one bonded project to another bonded project. Does it have to be at the school or is it back to?
No, that's correct. Dan, you're right. It has to go from bonded to bonded. So, we could move it over, do other projects. And this does happen in every town. You get one project over, one project under, you decide you don't want to do a project. Remember the Still River Greenway? We decided we didn't want to do that. We're going to give up that grant. So this is bonded to bonded. It doesn't affect the mill rate today, but would in the future. But it would lower it because we're going to do less borrowing.
Right.
And
so
remember,
one of the decisions we have to make during this next 2 to 3 week process is what bonded project to do that money. It's not, like you said, it's not going to affect the operating budget or the mill rate, which is the primary concern, but the capital projects and what we're planning for, does it go to a locker room to reserve? Does it go to other reserve projects? Does it go to what you just get? That's another decision we have to make on top of the other work that we had. So this is added work. Okay.
We have much more time to do that because for all the bonded projects, we're supposed to have the town meeting on May 19th. We have to do a notice in the paper. We have to have a town meeting, and then we have to wait 45 days. So I would say put those decisions off for right now because we have plenty of time to do that. We're not going to get to that till July or August, even if you guys decided today what your bonded projects was going to be.
Okay.
So what you're saying is, and it's just an example, we approved $300,000 for the boys' locker room. We could take that 283 and only have to bond 17,000 of that project.
Correct.
That's correct.
Or whatever number, 287, 13,000, whatever the number is. We could reduce it, or we could look at what is the number for accreditation to get us to accreditation and reconsider that, correct?
Yes, you can make that decision, correct.
Or you could say some of the things we were going to pay for in cash, let's bond those and reduce the operating budget.
That's true too.
What would that gain us? While we're on that point, what would that gain us?
Well, it'll lower the mill
Lower
rate.
mill rate.
Right, I get that. Yeah.
We're going to look at that shortly.
Okay. All right.
it would
Your
go-
meeting. Go ahead, Marcia. Go on.
So then just going through the other projects that there was the evidence and record storage at the police. That's the biggest one on this portion that is been done, and there's extra money there. The Gursky shingles done, and there's extra money there. None of this is too significant. When we get down, is on the phone tonight. That when we get down to his projects, that we tried to give a little bit more detail to those. That just because we just kind of wanted to show there's so many different parts to this. But phase one of the streetscape, that's the last bit of big money that we've got. That they're working on the island. There's an encumbrance out there of 22,000 for that, but they're comfortable in saying that we're going to have 100,000 left over from that project. That this was one that was approved 3 or 4 years ago for phase one. That So that's where the big money is. And then we take phase 2 and we've got, we just tried to divide it because it gets pretty confusing that we originally had 865,000 for a TAP grant, and we still have that. We've got some of that in, but we haven't received the whole 865 yet. We have spent the whole 865. We have the bonded portion is 475. We haven't, we've received that and we've spent that. And then there's an additional grant that is a TAP grant that for additional monies that has come in, and some of that has been spent. We have phase 3 that, and again, here are the different components of phase 3. The original money that was approved for that, the bond for a grant, the original bond money that was approved for that, and then the additional grant that was approved for that. We have phase 4 that, again, we just have the original grant and the bonding. This is where that tracks. And then phase 5 is, this is really just Greg's time. We've been allocating out his time. So these little dribs and drabs are Greg's time. And then we have the Still River Greenway that is down here that we have a grant approved, but not much has been done other than Greg's time. That it's too big. That so that's the only other big portion. That phase 1 is the only other big portion of money. The fire companies, these transfers were things that we did to get the ambulance, and they went into the other fund. But this one is highlighting the financing costs that I think we can take. When we approved the capital budget, we approved additional money for financing, but we already had financing costs there. And now that we're putting financing, the bond anticipation notes every year in the budget, we only need to have the financing costs once for when we do permanent financing. So that's why I highlighted that, to say that we should relook at that and not take out extra money for financing. So that's the bonded schedule. That's where, again, where the big money is. That we have the capital non-recurring schedule. I think when we look all the way through all these projects, everything is pretty much on track. Reserves that, again, approved for the ambulance and the tower. Not too much is exciting in this one, other than we may have $40,000. If I can get this to go a little faster, down at the bottom. So in total, between these projects, we're talking about, right as of today, we're talking about $400,000. That here's the $40,000 when we adjust for that. So that we need to know about. The Board of Ed expenses, let me find that one. This is the Board of Ed, what they presented today, that the revenues are going to be down by 26,000. The best guess as of today, things are
Marcia, you're cutting in and out.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we lost you.
All right, before Marcia comes back, I think it's only fair to say to whoever's listening that, and Rosa can speak to this as well, that these numbers are not year-to-date numbers. These numbers start from a certain period, and Rosa has actually directed the BOE team and the admin from the schools to give us the full picture of this thing. So these numbers don't necessarily reflect the overall savings. Rosa?
Yeah, that's correct. These numbers are basically from when the schools closed through May 20th. So it's a total of 41 school days. But of course, a lot of these numbers are just going to continue to grow if we are closed for the remainder of the year. But for the numbers that we can probably get a firm estimate on, like, like coaches or athletic officials, for those, we have calculated about half of what we would normally pay them. We've added that in as sort of a savings, but only because there are still talks of, if we somehow are able to go back to school, so a lot of sports can still get a half a season in, or some sports in talks with other districts have been talking about extending their season into late June and July so that students can continue to play. So, all of those talks are still kind of up in the air. I don't really foresee any of that happening, but it is still a possibility. So, on the conservative side, we know that schools are definitely closed through May 20th. So the numbers that you see there are fairly good, or somewhat accurate, although I think there's going to be more, like you said, in electricity and a couple other figures. But
I think also one thing, Rosa, not to cut you off here,
Yeah.
is to say that I think building maintenance, you had savings already achieved before this came out. So I think these numbers are for this study from when I listened to the meeting. So they're
That's
not a full you asked for it. I'm not,
right.
that you've asked
Right,
to
right,
see that. But when you see $30,000 in savings on the school maintenance side, you already had achieved 30,000. So there might be 60,000. And I'm not holding you to that number. I'm not, Rosa, I'm not holding you to that number, but that's what I got out of the meeting
Yeah.
today.
No.
That
Well,
Yep.
can I just 1 second?
Yeah.
Rosa and Glenn and Marcia are talking about a document. None of us have seen it. Can
Oh,
somebody
sorry,
share-
Marcia had it up on the screen. She had it up on the screen a second ago, but I think it just,
But it's not.
Marcia,
you
do
can-
you want to put it back up there? I have it as well.
Marcia is muted.
Okay.
yeah, we lost
If you want to
Marshall.
put it up, if you're going to talk to it, then you can scroll through at your pace.
Yeah,
Up to you.
sure.
Marcia, come back to us too, please.
Okay, so can you guys see this?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so I hadn't planned on, making any kind of formal presentation, but I can, sort of like walk you guys through a little bit, and if Marcia wants to jump in at all, that's fine too. So yeah, we are projecting revenues to be down around 27,000. That's mainly due to our facilities not being used during this closure. So we could anticipate that number to grow a little bit. And the Medicaid reimbursement as well, we haven't had any information in terms of changes to that number. If we scroll down a little bit, we'll save on the substitutes line. So that's pretty accurate to this again, and this is probably what you were talking about before, Glenn. Everything that you see here are savings just related to the closure. So on Monday at our next finance subcommittee meeting, we'll be getting the March financial report, which will have the full picture of everything where we are to date with the budget, including savings related to this and projection.
And in
that way.
fairness, Rosa, it could go either way. You could, and I'm going to use the word overspend, but it's not an overspend. I don't know how to say it, but you could have areas where you're over on the line item, but you now have achieved 70,000 in savings in this time. So the net is 50,000 in savings, right? I mean,
Exactly.
and
Yep.
the reverse could be you achieve 30,000 in savings prior to, now you have 70,000. It could be 100,000 in savings.
Right, exactly. So yeah, when you're looking at this, it's not really an accurate picture in terms of what that line item is going to end up looking like. So yeah, that's
Yeah, I
true.
don't want you to get caught in a number and then
Yeah.
everybody says, well, she said 70,000. This is just a snapshot of this period, correct?
Right. Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
All right.
So as you can see, like in a line item such as like the coaches, we'll save around 43,000. That's for a half a season of our spring athletics and the Center School and Huckleberry Science Fair stipend. So if we somehow come back to school and are able to get a half a season of a spring sport, or I don't know, maybe do a late science fair, that number can change as well. This is just sort of what is likely to be achieved. Yes, we're doing minimal overtime. We did have an employee added to the health plan, and this was something that we had discussed today during our meeting, was that this is potentially an area where we might have knock-on effects if there are some of our employees that have been added to our health plan because their spouse lost their health insurance during this. It's likely that they will stay on our plan, into next year's budget as well. And we hadn't, anticipated some of that. So right now we're only at 1, but, I don't know how long this, pandemic is going to last and how that's really going to affect employment status and healthcare status for people. Okay, so the rest of these services and transportation, these are, again, some fairly accurate numbers, although in terms of the transportation, I will say that the negotiations there have really just begun, and we have asked All-Star for a really detailed accounting of, where this amount is to really sort of back up that number. And hopefully we can have that number be a little bit bigger. I did share this document with Glenn. So if you want to forward it to the rest of the board so that they can sort of take a look at it, that's certainly something that you can do.
I think we can consider it, but I really think your Monday's meeting is going to give us a better picture of
Overall,
what
yeah.
you've asked and what you spoke about at your meeting this afternoon. I think these numbers are nice. They're preliminary. I know they're fairly accurate. I agree with you. But we need a bigger picture, I think, because the topics that are going to come up are the 208 of the special appropriation, probably won't need it, right? I'm not saying let's figure out Monday. The forward lapsing 177 account, the K that's in that account, are you going to need it? What's it going to fall under? How do we push it forward? I think we need Monday's report. I think we really need to be as spot on as possible.
Yeah.
So next Wednesday, we can start to really look at strategies going forward. How's that? I mean, and we need to have the Board of Ed as part of these strategies going forward. This isn't a Board of Finance decision, I think, anymore at these points. I think that we need to have your team strategy and Steve's team strategies so we can come up with a plan for everybody. Again, we're the ones making the decision going forward. So I think this is a great start. I think what you brought up in the meeting today really needs to happen, Rosa. Like, what is the
I'm confident.
What is the net results? What do we have going forward? If we go back to school in June, or if we don't go back, I mean, as many columns as you can get us, I think that we can build a strategy around would be helpful.
Yeah, and I'm confident that we will get that information. And that's exactly what our finance subcommittee meetings have been generally aimed at. I will say, just because you had mentioned before, and you are talking about somewhat of a strategy, and I do understand that all of the boards in town need to be in on this strategy, but the Board of Education is unique in a way in that I don't see, and this is speaking from my own personal opinion. I have not spoken with my fellow board members, but the Board of Education is not going to make cuts or reductions to our budget if we are either not directed to or we don't value those reductions. So if we are directed to, of course, we do that. But we cannot lay off staff, and we're not going to reduce staff. And we actually can't do that as a result just of this.
Rosa, I think you missed my point, and it wasn't a matter of reducing staff. It's saying, sit down with your team, right? And Steve's gonna do the same. Sit down with your team, assess the current climate, and just go through the budget one more time involving the current climate and rethink if you can, right? Not taking, demanding, rethink if you can. Is there anything that, you talked about that was in the air, or you can reconsider based on today's climate, right? That you could say, hey, Board of Finance, we can maybe do 200,000 or 150,000. It's not going to be the best scenario, but it's going to be a scenario that fits within the climate of the economy, right? And that's not saying if you come to us and say, hey, we can maybe give you 150, we would take it as a Board of Finance, but it's like, let's go through the process one more time maybe and see, based on the current conditions, 20-30% possibly out of work, our neighbors not having the free cash may be available, that we sort of owe the due diligence. And if it's a zero number and you really come back after trying and it's zero, then we have to talk the next stage. But I mean, I think we owe it to the taxpayers to look at this under the current climate, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think there could be maybe some things that we can, considering how big these savings could potentially be, and even taking the offset of what we would have been over had this closure not happened. Maybe there are some things that we can do or we can purchase this year that might help offset next year. Those are discussions that we absolutely will have, but it needs to remain a priority that when schools open again, and they will, and whether that's this year or next year, we need to be able as a board, as a district, to hit the ground running. So we cannot be lack on resources or whatever that may be, supplies, resources, whatever that is. We need to be well prepared and ready to go. And keep in mind that there might be some long-term effects on our students. There's a significant population of our students that are really not well suited to distance learning, and they haven't had access to the best kind of care and access to their education that I think they could have had schools been open. They're not going to their outplacement schools, or they're not seeing their service providers in person. And so we might, I personally would think that it would make sense that we would see some of those issues worsen next year. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're deliberating as well.
I won't even argue those points. All I'm saying is just see if you could take a look, see if there's anything in the current, maybe there's a program that isn't really working that you was on. I don't have an answer. I'm not even suggesting answers. So when I'm talking right now, I don't want to say, oh, Glenn said to cut this and cut that. No, I'm saying to go back to your team and say, hey, under these conditions and underneath, this is not a perfect world, right? That we can maybe give back a little bit. Right? That's all. So leave it at that and let's see what we can do. How's that?
Okay.
Marcia, you back on?
I am back on.
All right. Do you want to add
Can I just say one thing, Glenn?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to Rosa, give you guys praise. I'm really, I know you guys are under a lot of things going on with the schools, but for you guys to, in a week, come from where you were to where you are on this document at $600 and something thousand, although Marcia just took it over. I really appreciate that. That it shows your dedication to helping the taxpayers in this situation. So I just wanted to say I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So taking all these things into account, the easy thing to say is, oh, well, maybe we should just take that one-time savings and offset next year's mill rate. And so this is what this schedule is looking at. And if you look up here, we've got each of the years going out until 2024. The mill rate, these are the mill rate that we have this year. This is the mill rate that's in the budget that we've got right now
for 21. And then this information is taken from the model for the new school of where we think the mill rate's going. There will be some changes that we know more things than we did, and it's on our list is to update that model. But that's the best we have right now for a comprehensive view. And mostly what we want to do with this schedule is talk about why it would be scary to take in all the savings into 1 year. So we talked last week about 500,000 from the town. The Board of Ed had a shortage of 485 in the February report. Part of that was going to be made up with the student activity funds. That's still there. And then the schedule that we just looked at was the 611. So the Board of Ed right now, again, it's a very fluid situation for both sides, is 179,000 to the good. So that's 679,000. We just talked about capital projects for 400,000. And then we had a very aggressive schedule in the model about adding to cash for capital instead of bonding. That's a possibility that we slow some of that down. So right now, without doing anything, that you can see the bottom line is the increases are what we had projected either in the budget or in the model. And these 2 years, it's high because that's when the debt starts going in for the new school, the increase. But look what happens if we say, okay, we have 679,000 of total savings, and we're going to take 100% of it this year, where next year it would decrease the number this year to, oh, it's only a 2.5% increase in taxes. But because that's a one-time savings, next year becomes 4.73% increase in taxes.
That's based on the model increase of only 3%, 3.5%.
Correct. And this year, as you know, we were unable to follow the model for the Board of Ed because of all these special ed and other costs. But it's just to show that, okay, that's kind of scary that if we, and I'll share this with you, that if we were to take and reduce the expenses this year, what happens to next year? So we could say, well, let's see if we did 33% per year, what would happen? And it's still a kind of a rough patch, but it's much more palatable. So if we're going to think about using some of these savings, either as a direct reduction in the mill rate we had talked about moving things to the capital non-recurring and then reducing that, or when we talk about, well, let's use this money to buy things so we don't have to buy them next year or the year after. Both of them have the same effect that we just looked at. So we want to be just a little bit careful about going through that, because if we take it all at one time, it's gonna be big. On the following year, we're going to say we can't do that. Does that make some sense?
I think it makes really good sense.
Yes.
How's that? I think,
Yeah. So
though, the number is going to be bigger on the Board of Ed side because Rosa's team's already identified savings in the special ed area that that 485 number has already gone down from the February account because Ken and her team has worked to negotiate. I think, Rosa, that number you had, what, 2 out of the 3 come back?
Yes.
So so that number is going to shrink. So we're going to have a bigger number to spread out.
right now we're not, because that shrinkage is in the 611. The total of these 3 things is the 179,000.
All right.
So right now we're thinking they're going to be under budget 179,000.
Pending Monday's meeting.
Right.
pending Monday's meeting and the calculations, the continuing calculations going forward, if we have spring sports, if we don't.
That's all assuming
but
they
this
go to school on the 20th of
I
May.
think that number's gonna change. I really do.
Correct, it could change, but the whole point of this schedule is, I don't know if we don't want to look at just saying, oh, great, we'll reduce the taxes for 21, because then we're screwed in 22.
Yep.
So that's what we do have some options here that that 400,000, if we said, okay, we wanted to bond everything over 85,000, whatever it was, but maybe we have to stick at the 50 and reduce some. So those are options, but we just want to be careful about what we're doing.
Yep.
Where's
So
the
what-
That
one,
makes-
yeah, but where's the 177 too in the forward look of the non-lapsing fund on the Board of Ed side?
That's not in here, that's in fund balance, that because they were going to use that to cover this, now they
Right.
don't have to use that.
So there's another
But it is in,
170, right.
it is in fund balance. And so that would be, because we have been doing it by, it's the way we've been handling it, which we want to change, has been having that as an additional appropriation each year when we take that and use it. So it's in fund balance.
Yeah, so
So-
this way, guys, Marcia and I talked about this, I guess, for 2 hours today. We do not want to get a savings this year right now for next year's budget, and then just whack the bejeebers out of people in the following years.
Right. So what are the mechanics of doing this? How does it mechanically work?
Marcia, go ahead.
The schedule?
No, I understand the spreadsheet. I mean, how do you take $679,000 and where do you put it in various budget line items to make sure to allocate it over various?
So what we would do, so the mechanics is we would take it and we would either put it as assigned fund balance and have a deficit fund balance every year. We would put it in capital non-recurring, have a balanced budget, but not have to fund the capital projects every year because there's some fund balance sitting over there for it. That's how we would make it work.
Okay.
Or we would spend it on things that we wouldn't have to spend this year. We would spend it in 20 and then not have to spend the things, but it has the same effect here. So if you said, well, we're going to take 679 and we're going to buy 3 years of school supplies, then it has the same effect, that if we bought it all this year, it's essentially reducing that, and then it's the next year that bounces up. So this is just a caution. So then we thought, well, what could we do? We want to help the people that are struggling, and maybe we rethink the option of what we do about the taxes. That we had talked. The selectmen had approved an interest rate cut that the selectmen had approved an interest rate cut, and that
Can I jump in there, Marcia?
you bet you can.
Yeah, we have 2 options. The Board of Selectmen had 2 options. One was to defer taxes for up to 3 months from their initial due date. And the second was to lower the interest rate on overdue bills. 2 weeks ago, the Board of Selectmen decided that, we want to help the people who have overdue bills the most. They seem to be the ones in the most difficult. And so we are going to, after talking to a CCM in the state and the governor and all those guys, we're going to relook at this. And we're doing some analysis now as to what that would look like from a cash flow perspective. And so we'll come back to you next week on what the Board of Selectmen, we may take up both options. Now, remember, it's only for people who actually pay their bills. For the lower interest, you have to pay the bill. For deferring, you have to fill out a form, come to us, say, hey, I want to defer my taxes for this amount of time, and they have to fill out an application. We want to see what the cash flow looks like. Marcia's done a lot, most of the work today looking at that. So let us come back to you on that, okay?
Oh, yes, sir.
But that might be an option to help, specifically help the people in need that, because last week we were thinking, oh, what if we just carried it over? But it has a huge effect if we were to do it all in 1 year.
Yeah.
Hey,
True.
Marcia, I feel like sometimes I'm like a Board of Finance historian because I keep bringing up the past, but last year we had a very similar situation, well, somewhat, where we had an influx of revenue that we knew was only going to be a one-time thing. And we, as a Board of Finance, determined that if we used it all as cash capital for that current year, it wouldn't affect the operating budget, so we wouldn't see the increase, which we really didn't see an increase this year on the capital town side from that. I think it worked out well. So I'm kind of not on board with this spreading it out type thing. I think that if we focus on putting it towards cash capital similar to last year, it worked out well. And I don't know. Does anyone else have any opinions or thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I think one-time revenue should be used for one-time expenses. But all this is doing is that, but that doesn't solve the issue of how do we make this budget a little easier on the people that are struggling.
But it does if we're covering cash capital.
Yeah.
You
And
make it
it's
easier
really
on the
easy
people
for-
struggling by giving them the savings this year. We figure out how not to have the big blip after that. People are
But we
really,
won't if it's
really
cash
struggling.
capital. Those are one-time expenses. That's a one-time thing.
Or if we put it into things like the apparatus reserves, and then next year knowingly put less in, if we put in 150,000 this year and next year we only did 50 because we know that averaging out over the years, but at least, then next year that line item in cash capital is a little bit less.
Yeah, we had
So Rick-
800,000 of extra revenue coming in from the fire marshal, and we wanted to, offset it in such a way where we wouldn't have such a low mill that we would get double hit this year. I mean, we kind of went through this process already last year, and it worked out. I think if nothing had changed, I don't think that what you're seeing as an increase this year is affected by the one-time increase in us using it by paying off the cash capital last year. In fact, the amount of cash capital we're paying this year is higher than it was last year. So
Can I jump in, Ricky?
Yeah.
Remember that we had predicted, I think it was $752,000 in permit fees, and this year we went down to about 400,000. We had to make that up in this budget, and that's part of the 3.58% increase. If we had the same
that's absolutely
752.
not true, because on the town side and on the capital side, those aren't what's causing the massive increases. It's on the Board of Ed side. I mean, that's
Sorry, say again.
The increases that we're seeing on this budget are mostly from the education side. They're not from so much from the capital side. They're definitely not from the town budget side. So that's not wholly true. So now we have an opportunity to lower our cash capital by using it in that way. I mean, and we have to be more diligent with how we're spending on the capital as well. I mean, I think we're doing a good job. We're on a good path, but I don't know. I feel like if we can do the direct impact now, I don't see it as being, and maybe I'm wrong, and obviously there's 5 other people whose opinions and more whose opinions definitely matter on this, but I don't know. I just feel like we just went through this last year, and it just seems like we're discussing something we've already gone through.
So you're saying, let's assume you're saying that we have a $5 million overall capital budget on an ongoing basis. It's the maintenance CapEx plus projects, right? And we're trying to move it more and more towards cash, but currently we have, what was it? I don't even remember what the breakdown was, but a certain amount in cash and a certain amount in bonding. If we take this savings and apply it to this year's cash capital, and then next year we stay on the same capital budget path, it would not have the one-time big mill rate hit. Is that what you're saying, Ricky?
I'm saying if you decide that you're just gonna throw more and more and more to cash and we don't have any revenue to back it up, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that's gonna definitely trend the wrong way. But I feel like where we haven't changed much year over year between capital plans, I'm literally looking at two screens with both capital plans.
Yep.
I mean, we lowered our bonding, but our current capital is only up $130,000.
Yep.
So, I mean, I feel like we could still put it towards the cash capital, and I mean, we have to figure out, I mean, based on the 10-year plan, how much of that swing of cash versus bonding is it going to be? If we're going to really do this kind of an analysis on whether or not we should spread it out. I mean, I feel like if we can pay more in current now, throw a massive influx to it now to lower it, but you know, things have to make sense. I mean, could we lower long-term bonding to then help that all these 10-year financing projects? Could we switch that to current capital? But the problem is it doesn't lower the mill by doing that. So I just don't see it being good one way or another. I don't see I don't see like this perfect balance. I think it's going to suck one way or another. You know, whether it's, you know, next year, are we going to see a whole 1% increase just because we threw all of it towards it? Or do we just have to, when we do the budget, say, okay, we knew we did that, and now we have to be a little bit more diligent and a little bit tighter with the expenses and with what we're paying on the capital side of it. I mean, I don't think the effects that should just be looked at as a revenue thing long term. That's kind of my point.
Okay.
If I
Something
may,
to think about.
if I may, we're either taking this very serious that people don't know when they're going to get a paycheck, don't know if they're ever going to have a job again, and we're trying to seriously do some cuts this year that we know are hurtful to the town, but we're doing that out of the respect for the people that are hurting, or we're not. Spreading it out is a way to make a percentage jump from one year to the next look better, but the net result of what the people are paying in that jump, it's whether they're paying it this year and paying a little bit more next year or not. We got to either look at saving money and trying to rescue people so people could stay in the damn town, or we're not really cared about that. And that's fine if that's somebody's opinion. It's not my opinion. My opinion is we got to figure out whatever we can do to try to relieve some of this stress that people are feeling. They're having the stress. If we didn't have coronavirus and we were trying to and we're putting forth a 3.5% budget increase, people are stressed about that because it's the biggest one we've tried. We're hopefully to successfully pass. Well, that's gone by the wayside. People were going to be stressed about that as it was. Now, add in no jobs, no future, no stock market, no retirement plans. We got to take this serious. And we got to make instant relief. I'm all for cutting down any increases next year too. I think Steve did a great job this year cutting stuff out of the town. If we have to do more of that next year, or we have to figure out some other creative ways, I don't want to touch a general fund, but the whole purpose of a general fund is if some unforeseen catastrophic things happen. Well, what's happening right now? So we need to lay all the options on the table. We might not like them all, lay them all on the table, and then make a decision and move forward from there.
No debate there. You brought up the general fund. That's another avenue I want to explore. Not something that I want to do, but I want to explore it and have the understanding. Can we either for next meeting, can we either have the financial advisor here or have a interview with them prior to that with part of the Board of Finance in that interview to understand the impact of taking 100 grand, 500 grand, $1 million, just scenarios of what would be the impact to the budget and to future bond ratings of doing that. So we know what that is. And we
Yeah,
know what our
Dan,
options.
absolutely. We've already talked to them a little bit. Marcia and I have had discussions with them. So we'll get on the phone with them tomorrow and ask them to join next Wednesday's meeting if they could, or if they can't, I know they are all going really crazy
Of course, they
with
are.
all, but get some information from them, what they think, this cut, that cut, take this out, put this over here. The bond rating agencies, I think, would think of it much more favorably if we had to take money from the general fund. They would understand that in this circumstance. I agree with you. It's the last thing we want to look at. But we'll talk to them and then come back to you.
Marcia, you want to
I just want
continue?
to point that those were all my slides. But I did want to point out that using the surplus this year, no matter how we use it, is the same thing as using fund balance. If we use that to offset, okay, good.
Well, I was just shaking my head. You can finish your statement.
Oh, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. If we throw it into capital non-recurring this year, so it doesn't isn't as obvious as using fund balance, it's all pretty much the same thing, that we're balancing our budget with one-time revenue, whether it's the excess revenue from this year going through capital non-recurring, or whether it's just straight from fund balance.
Yeah, and the rating
but
agencies
yeah.
know that. But we should talk to our financial advisor as to the best way to do this, and we will.
Yep.
And
to
we
Mark's-
have talked
ahead,
to
Martha.
him about, with this low interest rate, can we refinance anything else? But our next opportunity is not until November, when some bonds become callable.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, when we talked to them, they said that the bond markets are so discombobulated with interest rates where they are, that they think it would be very hard to go out right now and float a bond issue, because all the investors are so scared. So we're in a good place there.
Yep. And to Mark's point from a couple minutes ago, during the whole meeting today, we have not once talked about a cut yet, Mark. So you're right, that right now, all we're talking about is how to apply surpluses to get to a better number. And then we need to decide whether that number is enough or not, or do we have to actually cut? And we haven't gotten to that point yet. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, 100%.
I'll circle back to that on the cuts and say, this is where we need, and Steve and Rosa, we talked to it about it, is this is where we need both these teams to go back and look and see, instead of us picking an arbitrary number that we think is going to work, that we take all this information that we're gathering and say, we really need to make that immediate, adjustment to taxpayers and cut 1% out of this budget, and then force the cuts on both these teams. Or can they go back and look and see what, given the climate, given the situation, like I say, and I know, Steve, you said no teams have gone to zero, but Shelton has gone to zero. Who else has gone to zero? Shelton has.
You said Vernon?
Yep. Shelton, Bethel seeks to avoid tax hike. Shelton, no tax increase coming year. And I'm not saying that's right for Brookfield. And I think Rosa made a statement to me a long time ago. We're not other towns, we're Brookfield, and we strive to be above that. And I'll agree with Rosa on that. But what we have here is a situation that we've never all faced before. We've never had a group of 6 people decide a town budget. And now this is falling on the leadership of 3 boards. It's falling on you as a leader, as the first selectman. It's falling on Rosa as a leader of the Board of Ed, and it's falling on us as a Board of Finance. So I think we need to go back and look and see, in the optimal world, no cuts should be made. No more reductions should be made. Steve, you did a great job, and Rosa's come around too, and her team has done a job. But we got to look at this, like Mark said, is how do we make immediate relief that is true relief? Like, and Dan said, we haven't talked about cuts. Nobody wants to talk about cuts. We've avoided it as a team, really, as a Board of Finance, to let it go to the votes. But now we need to go back, and instead of, I guess, using the word cuts, what could we reduce that would possibly have as little impact as possible, but give the town some relief? And I don't know what they are, Steve. And I know this is, you pushed hard to get your stuff down, but it needs a second look. the cuts do need a second look.
We'll look at it again. I have no problem doing that.
And Rose, I hope you understand too, and it's not, again, we don't, you made a statement, you won't make a cut without being demanded to make a cut. I'll make a statement is, we don't want to demand a cut if it's necessary. We'd like to work with it as a team of 3 boards in this climate. And if I'm speaking out of school, Dan, Eileen, you can speak up to anybody, but this is what I think we need to get to. And if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong.
No, I think we will definitely go back and take a look at everything, and we're not going to just give it a glance over. We will really dig in and see if there's anything that we can do, because I understand your point. Because we had taken such a much heftier risk on our salary line and getting rid of all of our contingencies and stuff, it's going to be hard to reduce without maybe like world language. Of course we don't need world language, it's not a mandated thing. That's something in this town that we value, and so having a board of ed just sort of cut it because we think, and this is just like an example, I'm not saying that's sort of on the chopping block for anybody listening, but just those kinds of decisions are not really what the board of ed need to be for the kids. And if it's a program that this town values, we can't cut it arbitrarily.
No, and that's what I appreciate that. And I'm not saying that, but we've never been in a position where 6 people have had to decide a budget for the town.
Mm-hmm.
So generally we'd let it go to vote. This was a super high budget. This was a year that we've asked for more, because I can read you the town budget process. In the past few years, the school budget was a 3.25% increase, 2.82% increase, 2.85, 2.17, 2.05, 1.14, 3.4, 2.45, 2.06, 4.1, negative 0.26, 1.23. So we are in uncharted waters for the increase that we're asking for. And I'm not saying it's wrong. So let's be clear on that again, not saying it's wrong, but this had a chance to get voted down as well as voted in. We thought it was a good budget. So what we're asking you to do is to maybe look at that program. Now you say your contingencies have gone away, but now I'm looking at, and Marcia can correct me, is we still have that 177 of non-lapsing that's going to reoccur on your side. That's going to come back on your side as a contingency almost. I don't think we're earmarking that for anything anymore. I think the way I got out of this conversation was that's going to get put back to normal, put back to a contingency on your side. And if I'm wrong, correct me. But if I'm right, I think you got some back as a contingency. Marcia?
So the way we're accounting for that now, it's just in fund balance, but the way we think about it is different. So I think what we'll have to do is in our June 30th financial statements, we're going to have to put that in a separate fund. So we really have it there as a contingency and not as fund balance, but that's all just mechanics, and we will work on that.
I thought that the non-lapsing fund, I thought we couldn't have any contingencies. And I thought that the non-lapsing fund, the sole purpose of it was for a carry forward towards the next budget, rather than having to give it back to the town.
But we've never set up the fund, that you've always used it, usually used it before the financial statements were done. So what I'm saying is that we should take it and put it in a separate fund.
So right now it's just a hypothetical non-lapsing fund.
Correct.
No, but we were going to use it to offset the overspends this year. We were going to take that 170.
I know, but just to be ethical about it, they're not supposed to have a contingency, and the whole purpose of the non-lapsing fund, when we all agreed to it, was that it would be used as a carry forward towards the budget. And I know this is kind of a silly rant to bring up right now, but it just seems crazy that in the whole year we hadn't set it up properly to ensure that that's what it was used for. Sorry.
No, I'll go on record as and I misunderstood it, because I thought it was they didn't use the money from prior year. We set up this forward lapsing fund, so in case they had expenditures that they couldn't cover in their current budget, they didn't. It wasn't a direct reduction on the budget to next year. We weren't taking a 177 and deducting it from their ask. That's why we gave them the flexibility of putting it in that fund. So, I mean, at the end of the year, if we didn't set up a non-lapsing fund, we would take that money and put it to Steve's general fund, I believe. Now, what we said is we're not taking it to that general fund. We're going to leave it on your side, the Board of Ed side, so they had some flexibility to utilize that 177K for projects or whatever they needed. Steve, am I wrong? Please help me here.
No, you're right. You're right. Marcia is also right. It's the mechanics of how we do it. That's what we're talking about.
Okay. Sorry, I must have misunderstood them.
So basically, in all of Marcia's figures, we didn't account for that 177 on the savings line, and we didn't throw it in there. That money's still isolated. And we're not going to have to use it this year. So that can go to next year. Correct, Marcia?
That's correct. So what you're talking about is the exact thing, what you're and Ricky are talking about is the exact thing that I'm saying, is that it should be in a separate fund. It should be isolated. The way the policy is written, that for the last 2 years that the attorney wrote up a few years back, it's treated as an additional appropriation out of fund balance. So I think we're all on the same page on the way we want to think about it. And we just have to get the mechanics to match.
Right. So there is some comfort, Rosa, is what I'm trying to say, I think. How's that?
Yeah, no, I kind of understand. I mean, I was always a little confused as to how that was accounted on your side, because I think a true non-lapsing fund is a separate fund. And if you don't, and it is, like Ricky said, supposed to be rolled over into the next year. I don't think it's supposed to be, like, it has to be cleared out after that year. I don't think you can continue to let that grow. But that was just my understanding of it. I could be wrong.
Well, then, Marcia, go ahead.
You can continue to let that grow, that year over year. So if you didn't need it, like now we're talking about it, we're not going to use it this year. So it sounds like the thought is exactly that it's a fund and it does continue to grow. So let's say there's 177 in there from year end 19 that and then year end 20, it looks like right now 129,000. So we'll have a little over 300,000 in there if we treat it as a separate fund. But that's just different than the way we've treated it in the past. But I haven't liked the way you've treated it in the past.
Yeah, I think this is only the second year that we've had it, really. So, yeah.
Correct. So let's understand that a little bit better. That's part of this information grab. So you got anything else to add, Marcia?
I'm done.
All right, let's go around again one more time to close out this meeting and get opinions. Mark, start. Let's get a closing, and then let's look at the schedule next. Marcia, let's pull up your schedule that you and Steve worked on milestone dates.
Yep, let me do that. All right. So what we worked on, how do I get this out of here? I'll get you off my screen here. So what we worked on is that we tried to establish the schedule that there's a longer version year after year, but it's always based on the referendum being for both the annual budget. These are the annual budget dates and the referendum date together. So we tried to pull out the referendum, that we know the dates by putting in 6/4 as the date you have to have the budget done. The rest populate of what we have to do. And by putting in, but we have a separate referendum right now, that the capital projects for the bonding, we are not excused from having a vote on that. That if we had something that was an emergency for, we would have some leeway, but this is the annual budget, the annual bonding. So we have to find a date, and we can put in any date in here that was just me testing it. And then it would change what happens up above. So if we said 8/15 was the date here, 45 days in advance is when we would have to have a town meeting between 45 and 90 days in advance. So this is the kind of schedule that we're looking at on when is that capital going to be approved. I think I might even have a shorter one that I had set up, that so you don't care
And
about
it's
this stuff.
important to remember that this is just for the borrowings, not
Correct.
the cash.
The cash is right. The cash is rolled into the town budget.
Exactly. Correct. Thank you.
Can we roll these into one group of meetings though? Do we have to do them separate like we usually do now with this extension? Can we kill two birds with one stone in some of these referendums?
No,
no,
what we
because-
did, Marcia, let me jump in. Remember, Mark, what we did is we did the capital first, so we could have the capital and the operating referendum on the same date, May 19th. Well, that's out for the operating budget. Now we have to start all over for the capital. So we're going to have to have a referendum just for the capital.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you.
So what date do we have to have the capital approved by?
There is no specific date. The Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen should get together and decide when do we think we can legally and safely hold a referendum. We cannot do that now because the governor has banned it. But I think over the next month, he's going to issue a guidance on it so that we can pick a date. My guess is the earliest we're going to be able to do it is in August sometime. That's my guess.
Okay.
I just find it
And-
crazy. You guys all do too, I'm sure. People can pack into a Walmart or pack into a grocery store, say 6 feet apart, and we can't figure out how to vote or a basic right.
Yeah,
Crazy.
you have a point.
And I know it's not you, Steve. I'm not.
Yeah,
For anybody
we
that's
just have to
listening,
live with
I
it.
know it's not Steve.
Listen, both, all the boards, the Board of Ed, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, all want people to be allowed to vote. There's no doubt about that. We've been fighting to try to do that, but right now we don't have a choice.
And
I
the,
agree.
the issue on.
Let's go back.
This,
Hold on, Marcia. Let's go back here. Let's go back before you go to the issue. Steve and Marcia, what date do you want the Board of Finance to set the capital budget?
I don't have a specific date right now. I think we should concentrate on the operating budget, setting that budget and mill rate. And I think you should have a discussion about the borrowed. It is not going to hit the voters for probably 2, 3, 4 years when we go out and actually bond. The cost for bands is not that expensive. So I don't have a specific date yet, Glenn, because we don't know where this coronavirus is going.
Okay. So
But
now I'm
they
gonna,
kind of go hand in hand if we're going to be considering potentially using the bonded capital windfall that we got to alleviate some of the issues of this year. The decisions kind of go hand in hand.
No, the bond, if you use bonded for bonded, you're not making a big difference in the actual expense to the resident.
Unless we take cash capital from the operating budget and move it to bonded with those proceeds.
Correct.
So it does.
If you did that, yes. If
That's a
you did
legitimate
that,
option we need to consider.
yeah, I would consider that. I'm not a fan. We've been working for years
I
to
know.
spend more cash for capital. But if that's what you guys decide, I'll be good with that. But you're right.
I'm not saying I'm lying, I'm saying we need to consider it.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to consider it.
We've been working for years on a lot of things, but this is an unprecedented time in the history of the world. So everything's on the table right now, in my view.
I agree.
So to that end, I think tonight is a little too early to set dates. I think we need a little more thought process into it And I would maybe, next week, try to talk about it. And if we don't settle on it next week, the week after, have something firm. But I think tonight's too early.
I agree.
Well, it's not too early, I think. I'm going to disagree, but we'll get into that later. All right, let's talk about the bonded capital. I think there's another facet we're not looking at is if we can't pass the capital until we have a vote, what capital projects need to start July 1 that we need to have in place, that we need to use that bonded money that we found now to fund those projects? Or can all projects wait until December possibly?
Basically, Glenn, none of them. We have 3 years when we borrow. We have
Yep.
3 years from the time we borrow to
Okay.
start those projects, and that would be November is
So
when
you're-
we usually do the
You don't
ban.
have an immediate need for this, is what you're
No.
telling.
No.
Okay, because I didn't want you to get caught out and have
Yeah.
some July and that we're pushing this out. So that bonded money that we have identified tonight is basically free money that can wait. Not free money, but it can wait till decision down the road.
Yeah, it's never free, but it can wait. It will not go away. Right.
Okay. Now, on setting dates, we can't change the operating budget date. We have to set those dates
You have to adopt a budget and set a mill rate
by June
That's it.
4th.
by June 4th.
And back to Marcia's schedule, that means we have to have a town hearing no later than the 20th of the month, was it, or 27th?
Yeah, 14 days before June 4th, so that's, I believe, the 20th. You have to have a public hearing.
And all we have to have now is the public hearing.
Correct.
We don't have to have a town meeting anymore.
No, you cannot have a town meeting.
Right, but not even a virtual one.
No, not even a virtual one.
So we would have a town hearing,
Public hearing,
public hearing,
just like we're doing tonight.
just like we're doing tonight, yes. And that would have to be 14 days prior to June 4th.
June 4th, yes, that's correct.
So
And then-
5/21, we would have to have the town hearing, virtual town hearing. Then we would have to finalize this budget if we were gonna make any changes by 5/25 after the town hearing to give it to the town clerk. And then we would make a decision on June 4th.
Right, it has to be to the town clerk on June 4th. So June 3rd, even June 4th, you could meet.
No, it says here by 5/25, we have to have it to the town clerk.
No, it's
That's
still
correct.
30
Because that was, the charter still says it's got to be to the town clerk in advance, that it's not, the charter's not anticipating that we're passing it with just the board.
Yeah, so you have to have it to them, to the town clerk by June 4th.
Is there any reason why we don't have the public hearing before May 20th? I mean,
You have to have the public hearing at least 14 days before
We
you
could have it-
submit the budget. So
we
you
could
could have,
it earlier if we think we need to consider public comment a bit more.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you. Can you say that again, please?
So we can have the public hearing earlier if we don't think 4 days is enough time to process the comments from a public hearing to have.
Yeah, it's not 4 days, it's 14 days.
No, well, it's 10 days prior to the budget that it has to be at the town clerk. So if we wanted,
No,
if we wanted more time to process the town.
you can have as many,
earlier.
I'm sorry, you can have as many public hearings as you want.
Mhm.
The charter requires you to have at least one 14 days before you submit the budget,
Yep.
which is June 4th.
So Eileen,
At
you
least
could
14.
propose like the first week of May.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we have meetings the next two more weeks, right? And well, probably going into May, we want to have, just another, hopefully we'll have a better idea of when the school year is going, if it's going to restart or if it's next fall.
So you're
How
brought
come in a previous meeting, we thought that April 29th was the final meeting we could have to do anything? What happened? I
That
don't
was-
remember what,
I don't know.
We
that was
received
after the 30, that was after the 30 days.
Yeah, we received clarification from the town attorney.
Okay.
And that's where we are.
Okay,
Because I agreed with you, Dan, but I was wrong.
gotcha. Okay,
I think we
we were
need to
both
keep
wrong.
as many days open before that public hearing, to have meetings. So I know we've got them scheduled through the 29th. I'd like to see us have a meeting scheduled the 16th, the 6th and the 13th as well. Because things are changing and we very well could know a lot more information on the 13th than we would know on the 6th.
Yeah,
I mean,
you can
saw
have
how
as
much the
many,
school's accomplished in a week.
yeah, there's not a big difference between a meeting like we're having today, besides calling it a public hearing and
I understand.
inviting people in. So you're right, Mark.
So Steve and Rosa, can you look at that first week of May and see what meetings you guys have and that we can maybe schedule it around you guys? I don't know. I don't have the schedules in front of me. I apologize.
Glenn, we'll schedule our time around you guys, what you need. This is the single most important thing we're doing right now. So we'll schedule whatever you need.
Rosa,
We have a Board of Ed meeting on Wednesday, the 6th,
okay.
but that we're otherwise fine.
Then can we look at, as a group now, talking about 5/7 as the town hearing?
Public hearing?
Yeah, public hearing.
I would
Yeah.
like to get as many days, my vote would be to do it on the 13th or 14th and get as many days as we can to get information.
I agree with Mark.
I would agree with Mark.
We begged Steve for the time, you granted it.
Yeah,
I don't see how we can give up a week that Steve gave us.
May 13th is our regular meeting.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. So maybe the 14th.
No, you can have it at the same time.
Exactly.
You just call it a public hearing, regular meeting.
Or change the time of the regular meeting to after the public hearing.
Yes.
There's options.
Probably
I'd
better.
rather keep it separate. I'd rather
Yeah.
keep it separate, I think. I think it could either go very short or it could go very long. I don't know. I'd rather separate it and keep it to one issue. So
Okay.
if
Yeah, I'd like to-
possible, if we're meeting the 13th, is that our meeting? Then let's set this for the 14th. How's that? Or set it for the 12th, and then we can use our meeting to start the discussion of what we heard.
That would be acceptable to me.
Fine with me.
It's fine.
So right now, we're gonna promote the town hearing, the virtual town hearing for 5/12, correct? We're all in agreement?
Public meeting, yeah.
Public meeting,
Public hearing.
public hearing, all right, wording it right, public hearing. Rosa, are you okay with that?
Yep, I'm good.
And you can have your key team members there as well available in case?
Yeah. Yep, we can do that.
And we can work together on a brief presentation of all the
Yeah.
boards, so we can get everybody's input.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We've already
yeah.
started that, so that shouldn't be too hard.
Right, and I think Rosa's already given me some things, and I think, I only asked Rosa for one slide because that's all we used in prior years, but I think, Rosa, if you had a few extra slides that you really felt that needed to get out, I think that would be acceptable as well.
Okay,
This unique situation.
okay, sure.
Marcia, can you email us that calendar and maybe post it somewhere?
Yes, we will do that. We'll do that tomorrow. Well, we'll email it tonight. We'll post it
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Fine.
So then, before we close this out, does anyone have anything that we talked about before we make some closing remarks?
No, just don't forget public comment.
No, we won't. We will get public comment
Okay.
and then we'll close out. So I thank Steve. I would have forgot actually. So I gotta say thank you.
Me too.
So, all right. Again, I'll close out with what I have to say and then we'll go around the table. I think that we really need to have all three boards work together on this. Again, I think we need to look at the strategies we've all talked about. Steve, your team on how to reduce the mill rate with Marcia. How do we flatten it out? How do we utilize over time? I think we got to look at the strategies like Dan and people said about the bonding that we have, the savings, the bonding, what we can do, use cash to bonding. We have to look at the mill rate. I mean, the general fund as a last resort. I'd like to see, like we talked about as a team, look at the different areas. If we can make some cuts, even though they're not what, we would like to have, what could we do to get immediate relief? Like Mark said, these are all things that not necessarily going to happen, but things we have to look at because again, we're 6 people, or it could be 7. Steve, you could be making a deciding vote on this is what we're passing as a town budget instead of the 7,000 people. So I think we got to take in as much information as possible. So again, Rosa, I know it's not where you want to be. None of us want to be here, but if you can go back, we can do it. Steve, the same way. Ricky, you brought up some capitals and one-offs and how one time, if you could go through that list and get with Steve and Marcia maybe on your thoughts and have a plan to come to the meeting, next week's meeting with a thought process on that as well, that would be helpful. Steve, your leadership, obviously we're going to need in this whole process. I mean, it's above all of our heads, I think. I think we got a big decision to make and we're going to need leadership. And you sit in the big chair. This is, where you sit, and I think we got to work with you. Mark, you're right, and we need to take as much time and get as much information. Dan, I'm just talking off the top of my head, your skills and all of the finance part, if you can come up with something that we're not looking at as well. Brianna and Eileen, obviously, anything that you guys come up with, we got to work together on this process. So again, what I'd like to see next week is Rosa, you're having your meeting Monday. Get us the numbers that you talked about to give us an idea where you stand. Again, maybe discuss what we talked about at possible cuts, reductions. Steve, I think you have pretty much everything what you have to need for the next week's meeting. And I'll leave it at that and close out. This is a decision that's going to be difficult. And I think we got to get it right. Mark, go ahead. Well, I see you're the first on the screen, I see, so go ahead.
Lucky me. So I just want to be clear, I spoke before about, and I know we all care about the taxpayers, I do. I also want to make sure I'm very clear. I don't want to cripple the school. I don't want to cripple the town. I understand we can't do that. I want us to look at outside the box ways we've never done before, creative ways of getting through this together. If the education department has some cuts that's not going to cripple them, great. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, I appreciate everything they've done so far. And I know that they're doing all they can to help us. Steve, you had a great budget, and I appreciate that you're going to go through it again. But we got to look at outside the box things, because I know we can't cripple anybody, but we got to figure out a way to do this together.
Ricky?
I have nothing to add to to this long discussion. I think we're on a right path. I think we all just need to come and bring our best to the table.
Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything to add to the topics that we talked about. I think that, today was a good kind of high level and some detailed discussion about some numbers and some goals. But at some point, we got to start actually making progress on, doing this thing. And I kind of sketched out a decision tree that we need to really start thinking about. First thing we need to do is finalize the surplus numbers and determine the use and impact of those, the options for the bonded capital, the use and impact of those, any cut scenarios, do a cost benefit of those and see where we are, kind of put in a kind of a subtotal, if you will, and then determine as a board if that's a sufficient number, if we need to go deeper in either cuts or general funds to bring that number even lower. So I think it's a multi-step process decision tree to get to where we need to get to. And it's going to take multiple meetings to get there, but we're on the right path.
So
I'm sorry, Dan, could you email that tree out to at least me, if not everybody else wants it?
Right there.
I'll screenshot.
Actually, Dan, I'm going to expand on that.
Okay.
This is your expertise, so let's use the expertise. Can you put down, now that you know the dates we're looking at, can you put down somewhat dates you feel are feasible for each of these milestones?
I'd be happy to.
That way we can pass them on to Rosa and Steve that it makes sense of what we need when, and then we have, like you say, the decision points, and that guides us to our next meeting, because that will
Yep.
basically guide us through each of these meetings.
You got it.
All right, Eileen?
I think I just want to say the same as pretty much everybody else, that I think this is a good opportunity for us to share some ideas and, look at different options on how we can, alleviate the pain of a budget, of a tax increase. And I think we're all have the same, our taxpayers in mind, but also keeping in mind the schools and the towns functioning and supporting everybody. So I think we're heading in the right direction, just need to keep moving forward.
Okay, Brianna?
Yeah, I honestly don't have anything to add. I think it was a great meeting tonight. And I think, next week we're just gonna have to start looking at the numbers and making decisions based on those and figuring out, like Dan said, what's the benefit, if there's not a benefit to it, move on and keep going. We're gonna have to put one foot in front of the other each meeting to get to a decision.
Okay, thank you. Rosa, I'll let you come in if you'd like, since you've been a part of this meeting with us tonight.
Thank you. No, I don't really have much else to add. I can just, promise that on Monday when we're meeting as a finance committee and eventually as a full board, we will do our best to take a look at, every possible way that we can make any kind of smart reductions, if that's even possible. But it's, I can just promise you that we'll look for sure.
All we can ask. Steve, you want to add 2 cents in as a closing thing as well?
Just quickly, I think you guys are doing a great job. I know you're under a lot of stress here, but I think the way you're approaching this is the right way. I think Dan's idea of a decision tree of what we need to do is a fantastic one, and we'll support you as much as we can. Thanks.
Perfect. Marcia, you've also been a part. You have any closing things?
No, I think you're moving this in the right direction. You're doing a nice job.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. Let's, any public comment before we close this out?
Mr. DeStefan is raising his hand.
Yep, Ray, you're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you to all of you for doing the work you're doing. I was on the Board of Ed when the tragedy of Sandy Hook happened, and being in one of these positions at a time of crisis is very difficult. So I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. There was a couple of things I wanted to talk about, but I think I'm just going to stick to one topic, and that's the issue of budget reductions. While I understand the idea of wanting to be helpful to some taxpayers who may be in tough economic times, I don't think there's a reduction that you could make realistically that's going to keep somebody in the town who may not otherwise be able to stay in the town. I don't think there's a reduction that you're going to make that's going to come anywhere near making up for a lost salary or for something like that in a home. If you cut $1 million out of this budget, what would the average savings per household be? I don't know, $10, something like that per month. It would be pretty small. In the meantime, what does it do on the other end? Well, austerity measures, we know, weakens the structure of government, weakens the school system. And this is not the time to make our town and our schools weaker. It's the time to strengthen these things and to fortify them. We see this at the federal level. We see this at the state level. They're not talking about cutting taxes right now at the federal level. Neither Republicans or Democrats. They're talking about spending and spending in unprecedented ways. They're arguing about what to spend on, but nobody's talking about not spending. It's time to invest and to fortify the things that we have, not to weaken them. Kids coming back to school, whenever that is, are going to have learning deficits from the time that we had to do this distance learning. Rosa mentioned before, despite the great efforts of the school staff, not every kid is able to learn through distant learning means. And the longer we go, the bigger the deficits they're going to have come whether it be June or the fall or who knows when, right? There's going to be things that need to be made up. We need our schools to be stronger than they were before, not the other way around. Our emergency services need to be stronger than they've ever been before. It's never been more important. Our parks and open spaces have never been more important than they are right now. We've heard about in the past reductions coming by way of things that don't affect kids. And a lot of times one of those ways was custodial staff. How's that looking right now? We need our custodian staff to be stronger than it's ever been. We need to keep our schools safe and clean and sanitized. So while I do appreciate the fact that we're looking to give relief to people, I think we have to really think about if that's the best way to go right now. I think the best way to go right now is to make sure that our schools and our town government and all the services that it offers and that so many people rely on are stronger than they've ever been, because they're going to be relied on more than they've ever been before. And there are some other things that you talked about, but you guys covered a lot. I just want to keep my comments, I think, to that for now, but I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Anybody else?
Hearing none, I make a motion to adjourn.
Hold on a minute. Hearing none, I think we got to make a comment. I think let's not go away from the table thinking we're making cuts or we're doing this. Let's go from this as saying we're looking at every option and doing due diligence in a time that no other board has ever faced, that we're making a decision for the town. I don't know if Brookfield's ever not had a vote in the history of Brookfield on a town budget. So when we start talking reductions, I agree. We got to look at not making cuts that are irrelevant and not making cuts that just for making cuts. We got to look at all the options. And it's not saying this board is making cuts. It's not saying anything. We're looking at all options on the table to make the best possible decision. And we don't know what that is until we get the data and get the feedback from each of the boards. So I think that's what we're asking for, is not how do we, cut totally, or how do we not cut or anything like that. It's a matter of getting the best information. And I don't think that tonight's meeting puts stress on any one of the boards to demand anything. I think it's just, we're in this together. We need to look at all options and look at any way we can to support the town and the taxpayers. So I want it to be clear and nobody to understand, we're not looking to make cuts. We're looking to gather information and talk about everything and do due diligence. And instead of it going to a vote, unfortunately, like I say, it's not 6,000 people, 3,000 people deciding, it's 6 people deciding what's best for the town. And that's a hard thing to do without looking at every option out there. I think we tried to give comfort to the Board of Ed. We had with Rosa tonight, we brought her into the meeting, and I want the town to know we listened to what she had to say. And we're bringing Steve and Marcia's expertise into this. So I think that, let's not focus on one word of a process called cuts or reductions. Let's focus on the bigger picture of, we're looking to solve a problem during the biggest crisis that we've supposedly had here in Brookfield going forward. And that's how I feel. And I'll let someone else comment before we make a motion if they want to say something. So anybody else want to add to that? Or just say I'm wrong? I mean, I'm open to have people say I'm wrong too. But I think we're not focusing on one word here. Dan made a decision tree based on a lot of words, like a lot of different scenarios. I think we got to look at them all. So on that, I'll close. So go ahead, Mark.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Safe.